Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 320, with Ton-Quinlivan, CEO of Futuro Health and host of the WorkforceRx podcast. Another kind of crossover episode here this week, just like last week with Ashish, if you listen to that one. Both of these really great episodes. Appreciate Vaughn coming on and talking through something I've always been curious about, really I've ever explored in depth on the show. Free tuition, what does that sort of imply? What does it kind of require for it to be a successful initiative, whether it is something broader at kind of a state level or organizational level? Vaughn's work focuses in on the allied health professions and the kind of workforce shortage in that area and how you can best bring together a variety of stakeholders to make sure that the training that is required for those positions is as accessible as possible. So that includes tuition, but also just making sure folks are in a place to be able to commit to their education and just really trying to align all the incentives, make sure that folks are going about things in a way that I think serves everyone's kind of priorities and needs, the students, the institution, and kind of the economy at large. I really appreciated the opportunity to, again, to examine this more closely and what it takes for kind of free tuition initiatives to be successful. And part of the equation is certainly focusing in on something, a very clear goal of addressing something like the allied health talent shortages. Without further ado, let's get to it. Episode number 320 with Ton-Quinlivan. Excited to finally be having the episode here where we are getting to interface a little bit more on the workforce side, but also the aspects of free tuition. It's a loaded term. I think there's a lot more detail and kind of complexity there than enough to get in the headlines and such. But something I've always kind of been fascinated in it is how you find a funding source, you help students pursue ultimately their academic goals, whatever they might be, and become more gainfully employed. Again, there's a lot of forms and different shapes that those sort of things take. We'll explore a little bit of an approach to that in our episode here today, but we'll have our guests start us off, as they always do, briefly introducing themselves and give an overview of their background. Go ahead and kick us off, Vaughn.
Thanks, Dustin, for having me. It's nice to be here and join your audience. So I'm Ton-Quinlivan. I'm CEO of Futuro Health. My area of expertise is workforce development that was developed in the private sector, where I brought a company of 20,000 men and women to becoming a nationally recognized industry best practice. From there, I was appointed to be Executive Vice Chancellor of the largest system of higher education, which is the California Community College system. And then when I stepped off after 2 terms and growing public investment from $100 million to over $1 billion, I was actually approached by Kaiser Permanente, which is a big healthcare system, and its partners. And they said, we're wrestling with growing the next generation of allied health workers, which you may know is about 65% of the healthcare workforce. It's the type of professionals you would meet, for example, if you were in a car accident. It's the emergency medical technician that comes on site, or the medical assistant that checks you in, or the x-ray tech. So there's a world of technicians that is the backbone of healthcare. And there's great demand and growing demand for them, especially as our country ages and we need more care and caregivers. I was approached and they said, for 2 years we've been wrestling with this idea, how do we address the workforce shortage, and can you bring some of those best practices to bear and help us with this situation? And Dustin, I had just stepped off from running a $1 billion organization. I thought, wow, this is crazy to go do a startup. And I know you have a lot of EdTech listeners here. Mm-hmm. And I had that moment where I really was in a quandary. Do I do this, and how do I step off the cliff? So what ended up happening was I began to reach back into my background. And you may know that I'm first generation. My family escaped from the Vietnam War and we came here. And I really feel very grateful for the education opportunities that were open to us. And thanks to this education, this free education, my family, my siblings, we were all able to land on our feet and came to have the lives that we have. So I do feel like the work that I did with the California community colleges, I do feel that the work I'm doing now with Futuro Health, where we're addressing the shortage in healthcare workers by equipping communities with the healthcare credentials, it's all about paying it forward, paying that education and that opportunity forward to others.
Broadly, that idea of a free tuition movement. Again, there's been a variety of kind of ways to approach this, whether it's just a state just has a bucket of money and people can pull from it to pursue whatever program at whatever institution they might want within maybe the public institution system in that particular state. But I think it's that idea now of certainly that recognition of, okay, we need more of allied health workers in this case. To get someone from point A to point B to be able to do that requires education. Okay, how does someone get that education? Who does it well, or like whatever else? And that sort of acknowledgement of educational institutions have a strong place in this sort of workforce development kind of work, and that they can do it effectively. And I think on the sort of efficiently part that I always like tag onto that, I think these sort of partnerships, from my perspective, are starting to, I think, force institutions to be more thinking critically about how are we able to convey important concepts to a lot of people quickly, whether that's doing things maybe fully online or hybrid, or maybe even just kind of rethinking the sort of a curriculum or the outreach or just any variety of things. I think it's kind of been this like breath of fresh air for a lot of institutions to form these sort of partnerships. You know, being an outsider looking in, just explain a little bit more specifically about the work of Futuro Health, because I know, again, even just zooming in on this particular, okay, we're really addressing like a particular industry versus it being something that's like more broad, basically, you can kind of explain with a state-based kind of initiative or something. Just explain more about like your all's approach, like how you are trying to bridge these gaps and get all these partners to work together on this common goal.
Dustin, I can tell that you've been thinking about the panoply of these issues, and they're very complex. And these are the exact issues that came up in a recent discussion that I attended that was hosted by the Lumina Foundation and the Ditchley Foundation. It was on the topic of reforming higher education. And at the table were other parties like Gates Foundation, ECMC, et cetera, who are all stalwarts in the area of higher education reform. Our country's profile is that 55% of our adults have degrees and or credentials of value to the marketplace. And the goal in the room was, how do we go from 55% to 75%? And that's an invitation to rethink about what is the higher education system that we need such that a broader swath of us can participate and needs to participate. And it is also a system where it's no longer for the young, especially since the demographic cliff of the young is such that we have 25% less young people coming out of our high schools now. Really, the action is at the adults. How do you re-engage adults? How do you upskill adults? How do you equip them with credentials for the first time or second time or third time? And so the learnings of Futuro Health is insightful because that is exactly the population that we were trying to crack the code on. How do you have adults re-engage such that they can get a credential of value that is helpful to them in the labor market? And just so the average age of someone coming to Futuro Health is 31. And they're coming from a wide range of multicultural communities, urban, rural, et cetera. And what we found was that it was just removing the tuition barrier alone is not enough. We actually did 4 focus groups, including one in all Spanish, and that reflects the California demographics where we originated from. And what we learned was that, for one, most important is that the delivery of instruction has to meet the complicated lives of adults. So I'm sure this is not the first time you've heard that. People have very difficult, complicated lives with children and all obligation, and it needs to accommodate that. But the second thing that may be a little bit more nuanced is, for example, if someone were interested in healthcare, turns out they have almost no idea how to navigate from here to there. It is very convoluted. So the navigation skills to be able to obtain that credential is really oblique. And third is that even for the few who figured out how to get that credential and land in healthcare, what happened was that they ended in healthcare with so much debt that they were stuck on the bottom rung. So when we created Futuro Health as a nonprofit, seeking to grow the population of allied health workers in order to deal with the shortages, we really paid attention to all of those factors in the design. And so there's a combination of a number of things that have enabled adults. Now we have 43 education partners across the 9 states and Washington, D.C. All the adults who come to us, thanks to our financial sponsors, they come out debt-free. And across 18 different types of occupational program, they're still completing at an 83+ percentage rate. And so what that means is that it's not about the education provider itself. It's not about the geography they come from. It's not even the program that they participated in. It's the education journey and the types of support and the structure of that journey is one that can be changed, and it's not just about the funding, because as like the California Community College, which is not different from many other systems, 60% of the students attend tuition free. So that was not a barrier, but the completion rate was really problematic, especially the older you get and you're trying to get your credential.
Appreciate you kind of outlining that, because I think it perfectly sets up where I wanted to go next of these sort of free tuition. Again, I'll hearken because I think there have been a lot of attempts at a state level. Again, the bucket of money, it's there and kind of just there for the taking for somebody. Usually, primarily, you graduate from high school with some good grades, but we'll cover you to go pursue your higher education at some short list of institutions. But I think with those things that you mentioned, it is that idea of that's only going to get you so far. Certainly, yeah, maybe help some people get in the door, but not as many as you could or should, because they might not even know about it or how it works or whatever else. But I think just there's a lot of important components that go into making a model like this work. But I'm just curious your perspective, I guess, maybe as you've maybe gotten more aware of more of these models, and certainly like you mentioned, like California Community College has some things that are kind of emblematic of this, but like, why is free tuition often met with so much skepticism, and like, where do you think that so many models fall short? Because I think you were getting at it, elaborating on that idea of even that some states or organizations or different things may be just, hey, you can go to college tuition free. But I feel like that's, again, just like half the battle.
Well, first, I'm going to acknowledge that the cost of higher education, especially if you're doing 4 years of private tuition, it is a huge amount of debt that you could be taking on. So the value of higher education has come into question in terms of trust of the institutions in providing economic mobility. So it's a big question that all institutions, the whole category of higher education is revisiting and needs to revisit. Now, specific to your question, it's going to be, so when we were doing the focus groups and we put out there that, hey, you could have a free, basically a debt-free education, no out-of-pocket costs. The response was that, oh, we're really skeptical. That doesn't sound right. Nothing is ever free, right? So we actually ended up putting in initially like a $150 registration fee. And it is not anything close to what it costs us in terms of scholarshiping, all that whole education journey. But it made the learner feel better about the participating, right? Because they're so skeptical about what is free. There's something about having some skin in the game and having accountability once you put skin in the game. That's part of the psychology of why it's good for them to also be a co-investor in their education.
All right, time for a quick break to share something big happening this summer. If you're tired of the same old conference buzz and want real playbooks and real momentum, you need to make it to Charlotte, North Carolina for Engage Summit 2026, this June 15th to the 17th. Engage Summit is where you can take the next step toward building the agentic campus, with strategies you can start implementing today, workshops that sharpen your skills, and a community dedicated to transforming how higher ed supports and serves students. Whether you lead enrollment, student success, marketing, or tech, this is where higher ed stops talking about AI and starts implementing it. And the best part? Enrollify listeners like you can grab a ticket for 50% off. Yes, half off. Head to engage.element451.com and use code DUSTIN50. That's DUSTIN50. Register now and build what's next. Now, let's get back to the show. yeah, that psychology piece of, okay, it's too good to be true. I'm not accepting of it or whatever. But yeah, I think there's other things of if there's sort of accountability measures or whatever else, kind of the idea that like, whether it is on the student level of a lack of awareness or accessibility of like how to utilize those funds and what I should do with it or whatever else, or the idea of, yeah, okay, like I get that resource, I go to this institution, but I don't know what I want to study. I don't know if like this institution is the right fit or whatever, because it feels like it's just moving someone down a conveyor belt or something where it's just like, hey, you graduate high school, you can just go to college for free or whatever. And it's like that idea of kind of the skin of the game, or just like a goal or direction for them, even at the student level. It's like, yeah, I'm going to opt into this because I want to help my community and to do so through filling a gap in allied health positions or something. So I guess that's what's on my mind. But even like, the other example, I guess, to not keep hammering on like a state-funded like free tuition system or whatever, is you've even seen, I think, when there's employer-funded tuition programs, they'll just, again, have this like kind of bucket of money. And it's like, hey, any of our employees can go and pursue a degree and we'll cover the cost of tuition. But they maybe don't promote it. They don't maybe encourage folks or give them any direction. It's kind of just like, no, just go and send us the bill and we'll pay for it. So I guess that's what's on my mind, I think, of like why these models will maybe often fall short. And then certainly, yeah, I think it's that big piece of the skepticism comes from just a kind of a human gut response, the sort of like psychology piece of it. But I think, again, so the idea of trying to like do this and do it right, do it with success for all stakeholders and things, your work lining public dollars and things, bringing people together with a little bit more intentionality, like talk a bit about that, of like how, again, I think that is like an element of the equation that makes an initiative like this more successful than something that feels more like ambiguous, aimless, or like broader based, that idea that you're like getting everybody even on a more existential level to get some skin in the game and things, I guess, is my impression. So if you just want to talk more about that and how it benefits the whole process.
Sure, Dustin. It's a common saying is that you get what you pay for, right? So be careful how you set the metrics, right? So in many public systems, the payment is based on enrollment, and enrollment is at maybe the 7th or 8th day of class starting. So they call it butts and seats. So you get paid for butts and seats, and you're just trying to fill the butts and seats. So when Futuro Health first started, the way that we were sponsored by our funders was really on the enrollment base, which meant could we get the people into these programs and fill the seats. We did extraordinarily well, especially since enrollment in the public systems was declining somewhere like 20%. We were hitting all of our numbers every day. And then one of our funders re-upped again for another 10,000 learners. We call them Futuro Health Scholars. And this time they said, we're going to fund it based on completion. So this is a really interesting exercise. And how would you redesign if your funding doesn't get unlocked? So once somebody completes, it unlocks a scholarship for the next person to come behind, right? So it changed everything. We had to rewire everything in our process. For example, Dustin, let's say you send your cousin to Futuro Health. It's a very simple process. We don't try to screen people out. But we may talk to your cousin and say, there's a scholarship available for you. Is now the time, right? And your cousin will say, I'm expecting some child, or I have this illness that I'm dealing with. Is now the time for you, or should we wait a few months later and then the window opens up? Because you're going to need 20 hours a week to study. So there's that type of conversation about personal accountability. There's also, okay, is this the right, do you like blood and bodily fluids? If you don't, these occupations are not a match for you. Think about these other occupations. If we're going to start you on the journey and we're going to scholarship you through the journey, we want to make sure that you have the intent to complete, not just do it because it's free, not just do it because your mother told you had to get off the couch and do a program. We really want you to be interested in healthcare and a healthcare career, because if you don't finish, we don't unlock the scholarship for the next person. All the elements, all the piece parts that we controlled, all of our education partners, their data, who falls through the crack, who doesn't fall through the crack. Like, we're totally on top of all of our education partners to make sure that people are showing up and that they're going to complete. So the whole ecosystem would raise our game because of these performance measures. Again, institutions, they're going to behave exactly in the way that they are incentivized.
Yeah, and I think that is a luxury, I'm sure, partially to like that idea that you kind of had this opportunity to reimagine, like you were saying, that idea of, okay, it's traditionally done this way, and that does tend to warp incentives or motivations from folks. So that idea of tinkering with the way of that idea of, oh, the way that we've set this up with the scholarship dollars paid upon completion and all that is just, again, that idea of a breath of fresh air into the process to like reimagine things.
For those of your listeners who may want to consider public service, I would tell you that depending on the seat that you sit from, there's always an opportunity to design and rethink the incentives. For example, I was appointed into the community college role, and one of the things we realized was that the dollars were short. It was a down economy, and we really had to repurpose the dollars that we had in order to get more workforce programs out to the community. So you have to scratch your head and say, how do I stretch the dollars? And what we realized is that within a region, there were many community colleges, like the San Francisco Bay Area has 26 community colleges. Los Angeles area has 19 community colleges. You can think of your states. Most states have numerous community colleges. But no one institution can solve all the skill needs of the employer and the industry alone. And frankly, it would be somewhat wasteful if you're doing the same program at every single campus rather than figuring out which college should have what expertise and do what they do best. So it's a question of how do you get colleges to play with each other rather than compete with each other and change the point of competition from college against college to actually being region against region. Because within the region, you have so much higher education capacity if they played together and coordinated, that it would be much more effective if the regions compete against each other than creating competition against the local college. I, as Executive Vice Chancellor, asked the question, why don't you partner together? First, they said, you, the state, cause us to compete. You, the state, cause us to compete. And I said, what are you talking about? They said, you put out these grants, and of course, the best application wins. So, of course, we're going to keep our curriculum close to our chest. Right? We're going to keep our programs close to our chest because we're competing against everybody else. Very insightful, right? So how do you change the rule of competition so that the colleges would play together within a region? And so we then began setting the breadcrumbs for colleges to play together by issuing RFPs, requests for proposals, that required all the colleges within a region to sign on for an education practice or a program. And if the whole region signed on, then the funding would get released to that region. So what did that mean? That meant that the colleges needed to talk to each other. You'd be surprised how many weren't. They would have to coordinate programming together so that if the students rotated amongst the colleges, that it would make sense and the students weren't starting from scratch. The way that you set the incentives, the behavior follows the incentives. So that's another, for those of your listeners who are thinking about what's the position of the platform that I can make a difference. If you redesign how you flow the funds, for example, it results in the behavior that you desire.
Yeah, that's another great example, because I think it is that idea of, you're saying, of like changing the rules of the game, because I think it is that idea of I'm going to work within like the boundaries and the rules and whatever, and that then results in X, Y, or Z. We end up having to compete, so we aren't super collaborative or transparent with each other or whatever. And then I was thinking of with the example that you were explaining of a student indicating interest or being referred or whatever, and you like checking that if like now is a good time or whatever. That's obviously a great point, but like almost just very practical questions versus, oh, give us your transcript, and this, it's trying to get to the same point of, are you qualified, or are you going to be successful here, and whatever have you done in the past, any schooling, and seeing how you did there. But I don't know, yeah, it's that idea of changing the rules of the game. Of I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like a brief follow-up of, in that situation, if you're asking a student, is now a good time, and they're like, no, but you know what, next year I think I'm in a much better place, because like those things that are real, I'm expecting a newborn child, I'm going to have surgery on my knee, and I need some time to recover, I'd prefer to wait until after that. Would you then do a deferral of accepting that? Or like, how would something like that work, I guess, to somebody has indicated interest, they maybe check all the other boxes, but they're like, now's not a good time for me. Like, how would you then engage with somebody like that?
This is about self-advocacy skills, right? Having that proactive conversation doesn't mean that you don't start now. It's about getting your family situation in place or your personal situation in place, because it's a lot of the personal stuff that knocks you out on your ability to study and progress through schooling. So I think one of the things that we do really well at Futuro Health is the way we begin the journey, because most adults can't go from 0 to 60 overnight. They need a bit of a ramp that's using all the new tools in education, including all the virtual tools, in addition to getting the family situation in place. And part of the conversation that you need to have is, what are the strategies, for example, to make sure your spouse is bought in, that the childcare is set up, or transportation. These are the practical aspects of being ready to learn. And having that conversation just helps the individual consider those factors and better prepare, just like we would do to go to work. You have to set all of that up in order for you to be successful. And then with public systems or private systems, there may be arrangements that can be made, right? You may find out that you can apply now and then defer a quarter. It may be best to apply later. So all those are decisions that we have to make as adults, and part of this is building your own self-advocacy and resiliency.
I know working with institutions, each institution maybe has a different process for handling that, and I guess abiding by that, but even just being of support to get them to advocate for themselves and think through their options and recommend things based on what they're sharing in their situation. Because I think it is where thankfully now I think the culture has changed a lot around gap years, and the idea that you can intentionally take time to put yourself in a place where for any number of reasons you may be more successful starting college than now, because you're going to just take care of things, like you said, get your life in a place where it's going to be conducive to it, or experience things to grow as a person or get skills that are going to be helpful for you to be a student, vetting in that way, having that be kind of an intentional thing and that's guided or whatever it might be. I was just curious about that.
I hear, for example, students that get disappointed when they come to the community college, for example, is when they feel it just feels just like high school. It shouldn't feel just like high school if you have put some thought into why you're there and what you want to get out of the college experience. And maybe that's what you're alluding to, is maybe the missing step instead of just flowing right into it. Now, we don't want you to necessarily stop out if that's going to cause you to fall off, but it's helpful to go through some self-reflection and think on why you are taking advantage of this opportunity to get a credential and to get your degree. And both of my sons, for example, did take gap years. One needed to take a little breather, and then the other one needed to have some oral surgery. And so it was best to pause rather than have that disrupt his education. So again, these are options that exist, and it's good to be planful in that way. I think that's what you're alluding to, Dustin. If people are planful about their higher education, then it will be much more worthwhile to them. It's worthwhile in terms of the investment that they're putting in, but also maybe the public is putting in or their parents are putting in for their education.
Yeah, it's just reinforcing that point and how, unfortunately, maybe certain situations or ways that a funding source has been put in place gets in the way of that. So if it's, we need to maybe make an adjustment to be more inclusive of that so that, again, all stakeholders are better served in the long run. But as we're winding down, I'm curious, this is important, complex work, like we've mentioned and kind of explained here and explored. I'm curious, though, what are you looking forward to in your work in the next few years? I don't know if there's just things that I'm obviously continuing to do it and seeing the impact and getting people into the positions and things. So I don't know if you want to kind of speak on that or anything else, I guess, that you're excited about with the work of your Futuro Health in the next few years.
We, thanks to sponsors, foundations, health systems, health plans that have state agencies that have come aboard, what we're looking forward to magnifying our impact in more geographies and being able to transform more lives with credentials. And in addition, we recognize the inflection point at this moment in time in the economy, not just healthcare, but more broadly in the economy as affected by AI and the adoption of AI. The work we have ahead for all of us is really to think about how do we accelerate people's skill set for the economy that is right facing us. If you think about it, traditionally, our workforce has been in the shape of a triangle. with the bottom layers being the widest and the fattest because there's more low-skilled or entry-level workers at the bottom of the pyramid. But as we adopt AI and more tools that do some of those junior level work, that shape is going to go from a diamond into, a triangle into a diamond with much less entry-level skills. So the design work that we all have to do is how do you accelerate somebody to the middle of the career, because that's when you're most valuable, because you have the wisdom, the judgment, the context, really that is very meaningful, specific to the organization, that is harder for the AI tool to be doing. And there's a lot of work for us as a collective to figure out that equation.
Yeah, that's a good call out, I think. Yeah, just like that acknowledgement. And that is, definitely going to shape the work in the years to come. Is I've been continuing to do what you do, but keeping an eye on the horizon of those things and how they're impacting the profession at large. But we will wrap up now, though, as we always do, giving you, our guests, the opportunity to share a final thought or a call to action for listeners on this topic to finish up the episode.
Of course, I invite the listeners who are interested in healthcare workforce shortage issues to visit our website at www.futuro, just like the word future, but with an O, futurohealth.org. And then if you're interested in hearing leaders talk about innovations in the future of learning, future of work, future of healthcare, I also have a podcast, Dustin. It's WorkforceRx. So WorkforceRx, available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. But really, thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for committing to podcasting and doing the work, too. We'll make sure to have ways to connect with you and Futuro and your podcast, which is a great name for a podcast, WorkforceRx, in the episode description. Folks should definitely check out those resources and keep the conversation going and all that and this important work. But just appreciate you for taking the time and sharing all that you did.
Likewise, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.net.